Tell Me More podcast is being recorded on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. We pay our respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures. My name is Olivia Molly Rogers and I'm excited to get comfortable in the uncomfortable with you and remind you that nobody is perfect and everybody has something going on behind the scenes that you may not know about. I hope you enjoy the podcast. Hello and welcome back to Tell Me More. Today we have a bit of a different discussion about intimate fraud and betrayal. My guest, Tracy Hall, is an author, keynote speaker, and senior marketing executive. In 2017, Tracy was a single mum going through a divorce when she met a man online called Max Tavita. Tracy fell in love with Max and the life that they were building together. She trusted him to invest her life savings only to then discover that Max was in fact not a real person. Tracy had fallen in love with one of Australia's most prolific con men, Hamish McLaren, also known as Hamish Watson, also known as Hamish Maxwell. She has courageously written a book called The Last Victim to share her story of intimate fraud and how she healed and rebuilt her life after the ultimate emotional and financial betrayal. Tracy, thank you so much for joining me and my croaky voice today.
Thanks for having me.
I have to apologise in advance for the listeners. I am still a bit sick, so not sounding my best, but we will push through because you have an amazing story and you have flown in for our chat.
It was an early start today.
What time did you get up?
I think it was about 4:15.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
No.
And grateful.
It's all good.
Thank you.
Good.
Now, I read your book, The Last Victim. I'm going to show it. Oh, there we go. This one. It was a fascinating read. I also listened. I read and listened to some of the audiobook, and there is so much to your story. I know you also shared a lot of your story on the podcast series called Who the Hell is Hamish?
Yep.
But for those who don't know anything about your story, could you give us a bit of an overview?
Yeah, sure. Early in 2016, I decided to start dating again after I'd separated from my husband about a year before. So I thought, I'm ready to meet someone. I'd like to, find someone to do things that I love doing with. And so I went on a dating app and it was Slim Pickings back in 2016.
I think it's still Slim Pickings.
Still Slim Pickings. I came across a man called Max Tavita who I matched with, and I met him, and he was in his early 40s. He told me he was a chief financial officer for a family office. And we started a relationship, and we were both in our early 40s. So it was a fairly slow burn, I would say. We didn't have lots of time to spend together, pretty much every second weekend when my daughter was with her dad. And we just enjoyed doing things like running and paddleboarding and surfing and being in the ocean and, dinners and picnics and really pretty simple, boring early 40s type of dating scenario, really.
Sounds nice to me. Very wholesome.
Very wholesome. We progressed our relationship over the course of nearly 18 months. And it wasn't until I woke up one morning in mid 2017 to a Crime Stoppers video of a man being arrested outside of his Bondi apartment with his face blurred out. But of course, without a shadow of a doubt, I knew that man was my boyfriend, except it wasn't Max Tavita, it was Hamish McLaren.
I can't even imagine the feeling when you realised that was him and he wasn't who he said he was. Can you talk me through that day, what you felt when you saw that video?
Yeah, I mean, it was an interesting lead up because we'd just been in Byron Bay for the weekend and we took trips up there all the time, and I was doing a presentation for a women's conference up there, and he had come up and he drove up, and he would always drive and I would always fly, which I never thought anything of at the time. He had a bit more flexibility. He wanted the car.
How long was the drive?
From Sydney to Byron is about 10 hours, 9 hours, 10 hours. But he wanted the truck and he wanted the boards and he wanted all the gear, and he sort of positioned it like, you don't have as much flexibility. You fly in, I'll come pick you up. We'll have all of our surf gear. And I just thought, great, what a guy, Anyway, we were up in Byron for the weekend and I flew back and he drove back after me. And I went straight back into working full-time, kids on school holidays, and I had missed a call from him, and I sort of got back to him and tried to get in contact with him for the next sort of all day, and with no response, which was very, very odd because we spoke so many times a day, like texting, calls, FaceTime, emails. And by that night, I was really, really worried. And I pretty much didn't sleep that night. I just went deep into the internet looking for family members, phone numbers of people that he had mentioned that I could contact to see if he was okay. And by 5 o'clock the next morning, when I still hadn't heard anything, I called Bondi Police and I asked them to go and do a wellness check on him, because I just felt like something was wrong. It was so unusual. And they asked me for his name, how old he was, his date of birth, where he lived, all the details. They asked if there were any issues with his mental health. And I was like, no, we've just had a great weekend away together in Byron Bay. Something's happened. And so they were off doing that. And then in the meantime, I received a phone call from a girlfriend of mine, and she said, I need to send you something. I'm going to send you a link and you're going to call me back straight away. And I opened the link and it was the Crime Stoppers video. So that's the moment I knew that Max was not dead, or he had not had some sort of accident. He had actually been arrested. And I called Bondi Police back and said, you don't need to do the wellness check. I've just found out he's been arrested. And they said, yes, we know that now. But the person that lives at that address with that age and everything you told us about that man is not who that man is. And I just went into a spin and I was like, who is it? Who lives there? What's his name? What's his age? And they couldn't really tell me anything. So they put me in touch with the detectives that arrested him. And I went up to Manly Police Station, and that's where everything unfolded.
Did your mind go to the money quite quickly or not straight away?
Not straight away, because I actually thought there'd been a mistake, because it was like, Bondi businessman, 47, superannuation fraud. And I'm thinking, what? Like there's a mistake. Like this can't be true. And, of course, I was in a relationship with this man and I loved him and I trusted him. And it wasn't until sort of being with the police that day and finding out more and then telling me a few pieces of information that I could then go, and research who Hamish McLaren actually was. And that's when my mind started turning to the money. And the police basically asked me, they said, look, you need to go away and you need to put all of your information together to make a statement. So I had to trawl back through, a year and a half of my life, every text message, every email, every mention of a bank account, superannuation, all the documentation, bank statements, transfers, everything. And through that process over the next 3 weeks is when I realized that, the full amount of money that I had lost. But I guess, to be honest, at that time, I wasn't entirely sure that I had lost it, because I thought that these investments were in my name. And, the police were sort of, they were pretty vague. They were like, look, we think it's probably gone, but, we're looking into it and we're doing the investigation. And I couldn't really talk to anyone else about it because it was a legal matter at that point. So, yeah, it did become clear over the coming weeks. And then as time went on, I realised pretty quickly that I was never going to see that money again.
And how much was it exactly?
I lost $317,000.
So much money.
Yeah, it was my life savings. It was the majority of it was my career superannuation. So it was sort of a 21-year career of superannuation. There was some savings in there, and there was some shares that I'd received through working for global tech companies that I'd sold and put into that superannuation. It was a self-managed super fund that he was managing for me.
How did that work exactly? So I think what first comes to mind when you hear that someone has been conned or, you know, gone through intimate fraud is, I think of, you know, catfish online and they convince people to send money for, you know, their sick family or whatever it is. It wasn't like that with Max or Hamish, right?
No, it's what I would describe as a long con. And I think there's a lot of us that see those stories on the news or on a current affair and you know, you sort of have this vision of people that lose money as sort of a lonely middle-aged woman sitting in her lounge room looking for love on the internet, and suddenly she is, you know, contacted by some prince in some other country and suddenly she's lost her life savings. And this was a very intimate and deep and long con. So, you know, he sort of manipulated me, I guess, over the course of the 18 months to a point where I gave him my life savings. So if he had have knocked on my door in the first 2 weeks and said, hey, you know, I've got a great investment deal, chuck all your money over to me, I 100% wouldn't have done it, right? Because, you know, what, that's just ludicrous. But when someone weasels their way into your life and creates this, I can only describe it as a movie where, you know, everything that he said, everything he did, every look, every email, every text message, every conversation, every person he brought into the movie, the Bloomberg monitors on his kitchen table that he constantly tinkering with, the conversations he'd have with people in his back office about trades he was making, everything over a long period of time just kind of made sense. And it made sense that he was the investment professional that he said he was. In the same way that I would talk about marketing and, you know, running campaigns and doing communications, that over a period of time, if I talk enough about that, people believe what you say. The continuous conversations that we had over that period of time set me up, and it was very intentional on his part, I believe, to set up this moment in time when he did finally ask me about my superannuation and who the super fund was with and how much I was paying in fees and all of this sort of stuff. That, you know, when he said, look, I can do that for you. This is what I do for a job. I can, you know, I can do a lot better than what you're getting. I want you to be financially independent, you know, and all splattered together with some beautiful compliments about how hard I work and, you know, all this sort of stuff that when it came time, all my confirmation bias had kicked in, and I was like, he's the perfect person to manage my money. And, you know, looking back, it seems so ridiculous, but this was, you know, this was sort of and I sort of describe it as the insidious nature of, you know, of this type of fraud. It's not one conversation, it's death by 1,000 cuts. And after that 1,000th conversation or email or text message or, you know, vision of what you think this person is and what they can do, you have no questions in your mind about. And I didn't suspect anything. And when you don't suspect somebody is, you know, trying to betray or fool you, and you think they have your best interests at heart and you believe that they love you, then of course that was the right decision for me to make at the time.
So you weren't looking for flaws. What was it about Hamish that did make you trust him?
I think over the time we built our relationship slowly. He seemed like a very solid human. It felt like to me that he had really strong morals, which is ironic now because he is the most immoral person that I've ever met. We enjoyed doing the same things. Like, he was just super low key. Like, he was really Aussie. He loved surfing. We loved exercising and running together. We would sit and just talk for hours. He would be constantly on the phone to me. We just built, I think what felt like a really solid, deep, intimate, caring, respectful relationship over that long period of time. And to me, it just felt like a really safe relationship where he had my back and he wanted the best for me. But of course, it was all fake.
All part of the plan.
Yeah.
In your book, you talk about how you feel like he sort of catered parts of himself to fit what you wanted in a partner.
Yeah.
Can you talk to me about that and how he sort of, what do you think he did exactly to deceive you, to gain your trust?
I describe him as an incredible shapeshifter. So what I know about him now is that he had a different persona for different people. So I was in an intimate relationship with him. But for other people, he was a barrister. For someone else, he was a businessman. For someone else, he was something else. And for me, what he did was he was very, very good at mirroring. So all he had to do essentially was listen to the things that I said about what I wanted out of life, what my values were, what my morals were, how I wanted to spend my time, what I was looking for in a relationship, where I wanted to spend my future. And he just presented those things back to me over time. And he was a phenomenal listener. When you're dating and, you in your 40s or even in your 30s or 20s, like to sit with a man who will actually sit with you and listen and talk through things, that was really appealing to me. But of course, he was using it for ill intent. He'd just reflect those things back to me. And at the beginning, there were a lot of cars at the beginning, which showed themselves slowly over time. So first there was a car, then, over, the corresponding 9 or 10 months after that, they ended up being 5 cars. And I think by the time I saw the 4th car, I was just, having a joke with him and going, you're such a jerk. Like, what kind of single 40-year-old guy who lives in Bondi needs 4 cars? That's ridiculous. And because I just think there's something really excessive about that. And then suddenly the cars started disappearing. And, I feel like if I had been the person who was impressed by that, or if I had wanted to go out to super fancy dinners all the time, or if I had wanted to be showered with designer clothing and gifts, then that would have come my way, because what he did was he just reflected whatever the person wanted or needed, and he found their spot, and that's how he got people to trust him. And it was different for everybody. So that was it for me. I was just looking for someone who wanted to do similar things to me, that had same values and morals, and wanted to go running and wanted to go surfing and wanted to go for a picnic on the beach and not sort of do all those super fancy things. So that's how he built trust with me. And I think again, it's another bias that we have. It's a similarity bias. You are more likely to trust and believe someone and love someone when they present back to you what you're looking at in yourself. So all he had to do was present back to me the things that I wanted out of my life, and I naturally fell in love with him. I naturally trusted him. And that's sort of one of these brain glitches that we all have, that we have to be aware of, which I'm much more aware of now. But at the time I thought, God, isn't this great? Like, I found the male version of myself. This is awesome. This is what relationships are meant to be like. I'm having the best time ever. And, of course, that was all his plan to deceive me.
Hindsight is 2020.
Oh, it's so good.
Speaking of hindsight, in your book, I really like how there are many segments that are broken up with red flags. So you're telling the story and then there'll be a flag and you say red flag and then explain it. Obviously, you can see all of these very clearly in hindsight. Can you talk me through what some of those were?
Yeah, and there's another quote in the book it's to that, you can only connect the dots in reverse. And it's only now, or, after it all happened, that I can look back and think, oh my Lord, like, why did I believe that? Or why didn't I question that? Or, those sort of things. But there were many things. I mean, his stories were, in some ways, really far-fetched, like really kind of outlandish. But at the time when he would tell me, it all matched. Like, this was the amazing thing about him. It never slipped up. Like, there was never a conflict of information. So the story,
it's quite impressive that he could keep up with that many lies.
on some level, because, I don't even remember what I had for breakfast yesterday. And yet these elaborate stories. And it wasn't just I was in America when 9/11 hit. It was the details surrounding that experience. And it was almost like make the lie so big that you can't not believe it. And just the details around, people's first and last names, who were there, what floor they worked on, what company they worked for, what role they had in the company, how he knew them. Like, just the level of detail in every story, it was hard to kind of, I don't know, I guess you just don't sit there. It's not natural human behavior to go, oh, really? Come on, that's a bit weird. Like,
and also not in your nature.
Not in my nature, and not when you don't mistrust somebody or you suspect. So some of the stories were quite elaborate, and sometimes I didn't quite know whether he was just joking about things. Like, there were some really big stories that I didn't question. I just went, oh, wow, okay. And then there were other things that he was quite jovial about things. So I wasn't sure if it was just a bit of a joke and just a bit of humour. And also, too, you just sort of brush past things and conversations move on. I think some of the other red flags were he didn't have a digital footprint, which I did try and look into a few times. I asked him about it. And I think, in this day and age, it's really, really odd not to have anything written about you on the internet, whether it be your job, some article you've appeared in some local newspaper 15 years ago. Like, there's always something. And he didn't have a social footprint. Of course, he didn't have social media. But I've got friends that aren't on social media, so that's not too weird. But not to have a digital footprint, I think, was very, very strange. And then I think some of the other things were like just not really meeting or having exposure to any close friends or family. So I did meet some people throughout that 18 months, but I'd asked to go and meet his sister, who he was very close with, and I'd met her husband, and I hadn't met their children, but he'd talk about them all the time. They were always on the phone, and I'd say, let's go see them. Let's go meet them. I really want to meet them. Or they'd be up in Sydney, and it always happened to be at a time when, when I had my daughter with me, and I said, that's okay. I'll get a babysitter. I'd really like to meet them. And everything was always like future promised. Like, yeah, of course, babe, we'll do that next weekend, or we'll do that in 2 weeks' time because I've got this happening first. And it was just this like moving deadline that was always future focused, and it never sort of happened. And then, of course, time goes on and you get distracted, or something else happens, or, I was busy. I was a sort of a single mum working full time, just like life just rolls on. And, I didn't push. I probably should have pushed a bit harder for it. But there were certainly lots and lots of red flags, which I do sort of pull out, as you said, in the narrative, which are good little warning signals maybe to other people that maybe that's something you should like ask a little bit more about, or just question a little harder. Yeah.
It sounds like you did have those gut feelings though when it came to the finances, and like the first time that he initiated a conversation about you investing. Can you tell me about that?
I asked questions because the very first time he brought it up, he had said he was sort of privy to some information that he had got through work, and they were investing for their family office clients. And I had said to him, but, isn't that insider trading? Like, if you're using that knowledge to further your own financial gain. And he just as quick as a bat came back. He said, no, I've already spoken to the lawyer about that, because I did think about that myself. And here was the response. And it wasn't just like, no, it's fine. It was like a good 5-minute mansplain about why the barrister or the lawyer had said what they'd said and why it wasn't insider training. And, you know, this is a thing, like everything had so much detail. It wasn't just sort of like a brush off, like there, go away, stop asking questions. It was very considered, detailed responses. So you just don't question that. I think, I mean, that was sort of the first thing I felt. And then really after that, there was not really a lot of intuitive senses popping up for me. And I think that was one of the hardest things after he was arrested, was reconciling that with myself, that I hadn't picked up on the things that I thought that I would have.
But it just sounds like he was such a good actor.
He was, and, you know, he has never had a full-time job. He's done this job his whole life. And, you know, I've worked in marketing my whole life and I'm pretty good at it now. And I think when you do anything for 25, 30 years, you get good at it. And he could read people. He listened. He knew what he needed to do. He, you know, he had many, many victims and had defrauded people all over the world for millions and millions of dollars. So, you know, by the time he got to the last victim, which is me, you know, he was a professional.
Yeah.
And there would be people that would sit there and think, you know, that would never happen to me. And I have to be honest, I was probably one of those people as well. But yet I was in a deep and intimate relationship with this man I trusted. And, you know, here I am, I lost my life savings.
You mentioned in the book that there were a couple of your friends who flagged concerns. And one of the red flags seemed to be that you would make plans with your friends for him to meet your friends. And there'd always be some sort of reason why he couldn't come, and he'd often flake.
Yeah.
Can you tell me about those conversations with your friends and how you sort of brushed it off?
Yeah, that was really personally disappointing for me, because I really loved him and I wanted him to meet my friends, and he had met my family. But I wanted them to see who I was spending my spare time with and get to know him and bring him into my world with my friends as well. And he seemed very reticent to do that. I think the way I kind of justified that, and, you know, I feel like in retrospect, like, you know, this is a common trait of a lot of women. We make excuses for poor behavior sometimes because we don't want to upset people, or, you know, we don't want them to look bad in front of our friends or whatever. And I would just sort of brush it off as him being a little quirky, you know. And yes, it was disappointing, but there was always an excuse or a reason. So I just excused it. So in retrospect, I think those excuses I made for him were more to just protect him and his reputation, you know, in relation to my friends. But he, of course, always had a reason. And then there was one particular friend who was quite worried about me investing with him, and she was probably one of the only people that knew that what I was doing. And she is, you know, she asks amazing questions and she's very curious, and she doesn't give up until she gets the answer that she wanted. And she, of course, knew that I was thinking about pushing my superannuation into a self-managed super fund through him. And she wanted to meet me for breakfast one morning, and we met before work. And we sat down, and this is a woman who I've known for probably 17 years, never seen her cry, never. And she sat across the breakfast table and we'd ordered our food, and she's holding my hand and there's tears streaming down her face. And she's like, and I'm thinking, oh my God, like what's happened? One of her kids is sick. She's going to tell me she's got cancer. Like what's going on? This woman is the most stoic of stoics. And she said, I'm really worried about you investing with Max. I'm really worried that it's not what it looks to be. And she didn't really have anything other than her spidey senses to go on. And, you know, in the podcast, Greg, the journalist, has a great analogy. He said, you know, when you are at an illusionist show and you're sitting in the front row, You never see any of the tricks or the sleight of hand. But when you're standing at the side of the stage watching on, you see how it's all unfolding. You see all the tricks playing out. And that's how I describe what she was seeing. She didn't know for sure at that point, but she just felt it. And I said to her, Kathy, you know, you've not met him. You don't know him like I do. You don't know the conversations we've had. And, you know, she hadn't met him, and she acknowledged that. And I guess, again, I defended him and said, but he's just the most solid man I've met. And he has, you know, he loves me and he's got my best interests at heart. And I was fully believing it at this stage, of course. And she said, okay, well, we need to meet him. And we set up a dinner. In the background, she was doing a whole bunch of her own investigations and reaching out to different universities in America and different workplaces to see if he'd actually worked there. She was getting other friends to do like number plate checks on his car that was parked outside of my house. Like, yeah, she was really, really suspect from the beginning.
Did she find anything though?
Well, it was all sort of coming to a head, and she was gathering her information to hand me something that, without a shadow of a doubt, I couldn't refuse that this was, you know, what she was saying it was. But he was arrested before she got that folder to me.
Was she the friend that sent you the video of him being arrested? Oh.
Yeah. So she knew, you know, her spider senses were going off, and you know, I thank her for having the guts to come to me, because it's a really hard thing if you're, you know, if one of your best friends, you think they're being swindled, or you think they're in a shitty relationship or in a bad situation, but they're so into it and they're so blinded. I guess I had my rose-colored glasses on. You know, she was worried that we were going to lose our friendship. And that's a 17-year friendship. Like, that's not something to just throw away. And I think those conversations are really hard, but she wouldn't have forgiven herself if she didn't do that. And it just so happened that he was arrested before she had to present that information to me.
She sounds like a very good friend.
Yeah, she's amazing.
Can you explain what happened with your super fund? Because I found that confusing, because I know, you know, it's not something we can just access.
Yeah.
How did he get access to it?
So he convinced me to set up a self-managed super fund, and there's a process that you can go through to do that. That process is quite complex, and I guess you could say he groomed me through that. So he knew what needed to happen to get my superannuation that I had collated throughout my whole career into a self-managed super fund, which goes into almost like a business banking account. And part of doing that is you have to have a whole bunch of documentation. You have to work with a solicitor. You have to have a constitution. Like, there's a bunch of paperwork you need. And he essentially sorted that all out for me and took me through that whole process. I obviously signed off on it. We did that together, but he sort of guided me through that. And at that point, I believed that he would be investing my superannuation into funds and investments similar to what he was doing for his family office clients, but privately based on his expertise. And that is actually a legitimate thing that you can do.
Okay.
And so the way in which the super fund was set up, the self-managed super fund was set up, was completely legitimate. Everything was in my name. I signed all the documents. It was all legitimate. The mistake that I made was that I had a check made out to an investment trading firm. So as part of the self-managed super fund, I then went and set up a trading account with Bell Potter Securities, which is a legitimate trading firm. I filled in all the paperwork. It was all in my name. A JP signed it. And I believe that a trading account was set up in my name with them, and the money from the self-managed super fund would go into that trading account, and he would operate that trading account on my behalf. The mistake that I made was that the money that came from my self-managed super fund was made a check made out to Bell Potter Securities, and that was just an open kind of, he essentially put that check into an account that was held in his name, and he washed that money through and took it out himself. And I know that now because I'm doing different investments and I have a registered financial advisor, and I know that everything has to be in my name. I need all the logins before anything can happen. But of course, he was, coercively grooming me through that to get this check that he could then put into an account that was in his name. So no money ever hit that account that I'd set up. So I felt like I'd done everything right. But of course, I hadn't been through that process before, and that was the very last step, and that's where I made the mistake.
Well, I would have had absolutely no idea.
Yeah.
I don't think most people would. How do you feel about the word victim? Obviously, you used it in your title. Yeah, how do you feel about that word? Because I know you spoke about initially feeling such intense feelings of shame with the betrayal. How have you sort of come to terms with it now?
I think, shame was such a disgusting emotion that I felt during that time. I don't think I've ever felt self-loathing like I did. I've come to realize that shame is one of the loneliest emotions that you can feel, not only because you are trying to hide what is true about yourself from other people, but you're trying to hide it from yourself. So it was really hard for me to even admit the extent of the loathing that I felt. Like, you actually just feel really disconnected from yourself because you just want to tuck it away in a dark little corner and forget about it and hope that everything's going to be okay. And what I've realized about shame is, like, it festers in the dark. It gets bigger and bigger, and it just eats you up. And it wasn't until for me that I started talking about it. And it was really, to be honest, through the podcast and through The Australian and Greg Bearup, the journalist who worked on that I started to, shine the light on that feeling. And it has taken years. Like, it's been 7 years now, so I've done a lot of work. But only recently did I understand how deeply lonely shame is. And how I've managed to kind of bridge that gap with myself, but also with the world by talking about it. Because, there is literally not one thing someone could say to me about this whole experience that I haven't already said to myself.
Yeah.
In the most atrocious, disgusting, hateful way. And I think, self-compassion is totally needed, but that's taken a lot of time. In relation to the word victim, I have thought a lot about this as well. And I kind of repel the narrative that we can't be victims. We all have to be survivors, because it just, for me, takes away the real experience of having to go through the pain. And, like I talk about, like, a spiritual bypass. Like, you don't get a spiritual bypass. Like, you've just got to do the work, and the work takes time, and it takes a lot of deep thinking and self-reflection. I think the reality is I am a victim of crime.
Yeah.
I am on a victims register. I was one of the victims in the case. This is the language that is used. Yeah. I think where I differentiate the word victim is that I choose not to have a victim mindset. So that for me is the difference. But I don't have a problem with saying I'm a victim. Yes, I have survived. Yes, I have rebuilt. Yes, I have, built an incredible life now. And to me, that's about mindset. That's not about whether I'm a victim or not. I'm definitely on a victims register. Yeah. So yeah, I think I don't have an issue with the word victim, and I do repel the whole we've got to all be survivors really quickly after bad things happen to us, because it's just not the way the world works.
100%. I think people reading your book and hopefully listening to this will empathise with you and can understand more. It definitely wasn't as simple as it might seem when you first say what happened. What would you say, though, to people that think, oh, God, like, you know, how stupid? Or like that, you know, that would never be me.
Yeah.
What would you say to them?
I would say that I would have been one of those people if it wasn't me. But what I do know about this whole scenario is exactly what you said. It's so layered. It's so detailed. The insidious nature of intimate fraud, financial and coercive control, which are all huge topics at the moment. And they're, you know, financial coercive control can happen in many, many ways. Mine was pretty extreme. You know, he was fraudulently managing my life savings. Well, he wasn't managing it. He was just using it for himself. And then on top of that, he was encouraging me to leave my job. You know, I don't know if you remember in the book, but there was one particular bad day and at work, and I came home and I was just tired and I was just over it. And he said to me, just Trace, I'll put $1 million in your bank account tomorrow. You can leave work and you can really take some time to think about what you want for your career next. And I mean, in a flash moment, I thought, God, you know, wouldn't that be nice? But there was something that felt really icky about that. And in retrospect, he was going to take away my only other financial lifeline. And then I would have been really screwed. You know, so it's so layered, and these things don't happen in an instant, and they happen over a long period of time. And until you're in that situation, you just don't know. And it's the same with anyone that goes through anything. Until you have experienced a major illness or the death of a loved one, or, you know, whatever it might be, you can't have judgment.
Yeah, definitely.
But hopefully, I'm hoping by having these conversations, by writing this book, you know, does shine a light on these types of issues and shows that it isn't as simple as it seems, and that, you know, even if you think you're not susceptible to something like this, you probably are. I mean, we're all being targeted by scams and fraud every single day. It just not to the extent of this, of course, but we have to be aware, we have to be vigilant, and we have to keep this topic, you know, in the public domain in all aspects of it, to hopefully ensure that it doesn't happen to anyone else.
Have you actually been able to retrieve any of the funds that you lost?
No. There's no money in Australia according to the investigation. There's no money for any of the victims. So yeah, no money.
How have you rebuilt your life after that?
I've worked really, really hard. I think for me, you know, and it's not lost on me that I've had a really good job, you know, and I've fiercely held on to my career throughout having children, throughout my marriage, throughout everything. And that has honestly got me to a place where I have been able to rebuild. And I do often say that to women throughout all the seasons of our life, just try and hold on to earning your own money and earning your own income, because it does give you choices, and choices are important for everybody, but most importantly for women. And so I've had a great job. I have hustled hard. I Airbnb my apartment when I'm away. I do cash rewards. I do round up on my, you know, my bank accounts. You know, I don't live a huge life. Like, I work, I look after my kid, I love to travel, and that's what I spend my money on. And I think I've just focused on myself, and, you know, I've really tried to get my head right, because I think when you're in a good frame of mind, you can do anything. I think, to be honest, Liv, like, the hardest thing was not the money part, even though my future, you know, I was sort of mid-40s at this point, like early to mid-40s. My future is, like, my retirement, et cetera, it's going to look very different. Like, I have to come up with other more creative ways to figure out how, you know, or I'll be working till I'm about 98. But the hardest thing is not the money. You can always make money if you're motivated, if you're, you know, all of those things. It's getting my head right.
Yeah.
You know, getting back out in the world, like opening up again, and, you know, figuring out who I am as a human and what this world means to me after all of this, because, you know, won't give away too many spoilers, but this was not the worst thing that ever happened to me. Like, it was pretty bad. It was pretty bad.
You've
but
been through a lot.
That a lot has happened.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, that's just the experience that I'm having this lifetime, and I've just got to, you know, navigate that. But getting my head right after this was probably the hardest thing. It's taken the longest.
How did you get to a point where you felt able to trust other people and let new people in after going through that?
Yeah, it's been a process. I have a lot of therapy and modalities that I draw on from time to time, as well as things like exercising and going to bed at 8:30 every night and things like that. I think, if I'm really honest, the hardest thing for me to learn as I was healing from this was how to trust myself, because I made the biggest mistake of my life. You know, I trusted somebody who, you know, was out to betray and deceive me, but I made that decision, you know, and I thought that I had a really good intuition. I thought I could read people really well. I thought I had a really good vibe. I come from a great family. I've had an amazing education. I've got a great career. You know, my friends are awesome. Like, how did I let this happen to me? Like,
I can relate to that feeling.
Yeah. And I think I don't think you have to be swindled by a comment to feel that feeling. Like, there's things that happen in all of our lives that you just go, like, how did I get here?
Yeah.
You know,
and then beating yourself up doesn't do anything productive.
It doesn't. And that's the shame, and that's the self-loathing, and that's where self-compassion comes in. I had to really figure out who I was after all of this, how I trust the world, how I look at the world. I definitely see things differently now because I'd never encountered anything so evil. You know, I've traveled the world. I'm not naive, but I don't have people like that in my life. So it was such a blow to me personally that I had to almost take that time to build myself up. And then throughout that, and just, you know, also, I do believe that the world is still a really amazing place. Like, a lot of people say, you know, what advice would you give? And especially to your daughter, you know, she's 14 now. And I, you know, I always say I'm not going to tell her and her friends to go through the world looking for all the red flags, because if that's all you do, if you're constantly looking for the crappiness in life, then your life will be crappy, you know. And I just choose to look for the good in people, and maybe that's my optimism bias coming through. And I probably looked for the best in Max/Hamish, and you know, I was fooled in that way. But I believe that Max was an outlier. You know, he is operating at the top 1% of sociopathic offenders. You know, most of the world wants the best for each other, and I choose to believe that. And, you know, just rebuilding myself has been a process. It's taken a lot. I've spent a lot of my spare money on that, to be honest, but it's been worth it.
I would love for you to share. I know you're a massive advocate now for financial well-being and financial empowerment and independence. What are some key takeaways that people can implement to potentially stop this from happening to them, but also to just set themselves up in a really strong way?
Yeah, I think being aware of all the scams and frauds that are out there, you know, just the way I describe it is just be like curious and be boldly curious. Like, if you're not getting the answers that you want, just ask again and ask again. If you've got an inkling of something, just go a bit deeper onto that. I think we need to be quite vigilant. I do believe, you know, we need to protect our money. You know, we've worked so hard with everything we have. And for women, like I said before, like, it's so important to always have your own income, have your own money, gives you choices. And I would say too, if you're going to invest your money or do something with it, operate within the regulatory environment that we have in Australia that is there to protect us. You know, so that is with a financial advisor, a registered financial advisor, that is with a registered superannuation fund. If someone comes to you and says, hey, I've got this great idea, I've got this great investment, or what about crypto, or what about this? I would be very cautious of that. So I think, there are no shortcuts when it comes to building wealth. Being clever, being smart. And the final thing I would say is just talk about it. Money is the last taboo, right? Like, we don't like talking about how much money we earn. We don't like talking about where we're investing it. And God forbid, we don't want to talk about when we lose it. And what that does is it keeps us like in this silent, secret vortex, so that people like Hamish or people like the fraudsters out there can prey on you because you don't talk about it.
Yeah.
So I would say have bold conversations with the people that you trust around money, and make money a dinner table conversation, not like it was when I was growing up.
Yeah, I think it's so important. You sharing your story is definitely going to encourage others to speak out. There was something interesting you said about, it seems as though more women are conned, but it's more likely that the men are just not speaking about it.
Yeah, that is true. And what we know from the data of all the scams and fraud that happened in Australia last year, the most common person to get scammed or lose money in an investment scam is a 60-year-old male, which is interesting. They do have more money to lose as well, men generally. But I got asked a question recently at an event, and the question was, do you think women trust more? Is that why they get conned more? And my answer to that is, I don't know, this, the mind, the neurological processes of trust, whether they differ between men and women. What I do know is that women are more likely to speak out about things like this. So even in the case I was involved with, there's a lot of conversation around, the women he defrauded or the women he conned. It's actually not true. He conned a lot of men as well. And there were men that were conned out of a lot of money.
Because they weren't all intimate fraud situations.
I was the only one in a relationship with him as part of this case. But there were even more victims that didn't come forward. And most of those that didn't come forward were men. And I don't judge anyone who doesn't come forward and put their name out, because it's very public. Even if you're not speaking about it, you're in a, there's a court case and there's documents that are available to media and to the general public. So there's reputational risk. There's all the trauma that people might not want to relive. There's family issues, like a whole bunch of reasons people might not want to put their name forward. But a lot of those that lost a lot of money, I know, were men. So it's a narrative that keeps kind of developing on itself because of the way it is. But I don't necessarily think women get conned more. I think that maybe we just are happy to say, hey, it happened to me.
I finish every episode with a segment called Oranges and Lemons, which is essentially your sweet and sour of the day or the last few days.
So the orange of the week. So I play soccer. For a women's team on the Northern Beaches of Sydney. And we've just been put up to Division 1 this year, which is really
That's
hard.
Awesome.
It's really
Congratulations.
Really hard. I scored a goal on the weekend.
Really?
Yay.
That is so cool.
So, yeah, I scored a goal and I assisted in another goal, and we had a win, which we're not winning very many games this season. So that was they're an amazing group of women.
That's a great orange. And also, do you have oranges at like halftime?
We do. Actually, someone always brings oranges and a bag of snakes. And then afterwards, we always have a big table of snacks. Someone gets put on snacks every week. And we've got an esky, which we always have a drink afterwards. So that was my orange for the week. And then my lemon is, so I mentioned I have a 14-year-old daughter. So good times. And she said to me the other night, Sunday night after the weekend, she goes, Mum, we used to be such good friends. We used to get along so well, and now we just fight all the time. And I was like, I thought we had a great weekend. We had friends over on Friday night. You had a sleepover. We got Uber Eats. We went and did netball Saturday. You went to the movies Saturday night. Like, I was in a completely different space, and I'm thinking, what have I said that's made her think we fight all the time? And I'm thinking, I did ask her to unpack the dishwasher. I'm just like, that's it. I'm like, mate, you got no idea. So yeah, I put it, like, said goodnight to her that night, and I said, I'm just really confused because I thought we had a great weekend. Yeah, well, we just fight all the time now. And I was like, oh, ow. Okay.
Yeah. It's a bit of a thankless job, I think.
Oh my
I
God.
definitely reflect on how we were as teens, and I feel for my mum.
Yeah. I mean, if that's the worst thing that happened to me all week, it's not that bad.
It's not like being conned.
No, that's right. It's not like losing your life savings, is it?
My lemon is that I have been coughing and spluttering into this microphone. I am sure by the time people listen to this, those bits would have been edited out. Thank you, Matt. But I'm so sorry. This has taken longer than it should have, and I've been pushing through, but I think we got there. And then my orange is that you are here with Summer, who helped you to write your book, and I have known Summer for a few years now, and she's visiting from Mudgee, and I'm just really excited to see her, so that's my orange of the day.
She's the best.
Yeah. But thank you so much for sharing your story, and congratulations on writing such an incredible, honest book. I hope that lots of people read it. I think it's important for people who don't have any connection to any kind of fraud to read it, to learn about it, and really open people's eyes to know that it can really happen to anyone.
Yeah, thanks for helping to spread the word.
Thanks, Tracy.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Tell Me More. This show wouldn't be possible without you. If you'd like to show your support, please subscribe or follow the podcast on your favourite platforms, and don't forget you can watch full episodes on YouTube and Spotify.